Hello, everyone. It's Tuesday, that's true, and it's something like 10 a.m., by which I mean 11, in an area around Redmond, Washington. So, let's talk API. Um, because we're wrapping up a release, we gloriously don't have anything painted red, so we get to have a light day today, and unfortunately, we're also light on attendance today, but hopefully that'll pick up in the next couple of minutes. We promised an agenda ahead of time, so we're going to not quite do things in order here, but this order instead. Alright. This is me. Yeah, this is me. Alright. ObjectDisposedException constructor overload 51700. So we talked about this and we approved it. As adding an object and type constructor to ObjectDisposedException. Steve gave a comment after the meeting that maybe it should have been the static methods should just do the throw. Emo replied in kind. And then the reason that this is back up for review is the PR decided to go that route. And so now we have the PR implemented a suggestion, but what got approved was the constructors. So the thing to review is changing it from constructors to static throws.
I mean, it seems very reasonable because it doesn't do anything that you can't just do. It's a convenience helper anyway, and so it seems actually nicer to just shortcut it entirely, right?
Yeah, I mean, it'll mess up a little bit of flow analysis, unless the compiler really has that now.
That's the only thing that still pisses me off with the throw helpers.
But since this is just basically, and you know, I expect it's always the first thing, and it's if disposed throw. You're not really going to have uninitialized variables after that because you probably didn't declare them yet. Like you probably didn't declare anything until the ... here. So it's probably fine.
And it's for .NET 7, so we have an entire release in which to bug Jared about let's make this actually work.
Yep. So the one outstanding question in both the PR and here is, should we say that these accept null values or not? My feeling is...
In my opinion, it shouldn't.
Yeah, I feel that you're always going to pass the literal this or a literal type of, and if you're doing anything else, you're weird, and that I'll be very Prussian and say, and I don't care what you're doing. Emo did not laugh.
Sorry, like what is the suggestion? So I have an analysis that says when you don't use this or type of, that's wrong?
No, so in the PR, they made, whoever opened the PR made it support null. So if the type came in as null or the object came in as null, then it just went back to the default message. And then they wanted to decorate it as null with the annotation saying null is permitted. And I think that we should say null is not permitted. And if that null refs, well, why did you pass something other than this or a type of?
Well, the actual constructor supports null. And if you pass in nothing, it's null. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't support these being nullable and then just treat them as null. Unless we maybe explicitly wanted one that doesn't take anything and then tell users they have to use that.
I mean, it seems more intuitive, right?
Right, but the thing that takes null right now is a string. Like, that's what message do you want to use. This is what object do you want to use as part of composing the message. So they're different. That's also why it's an a method instead of an overload. They're semantically different.
Right, which is why I was saying maybe we should also have one that takes nothing for users who want to throw this without passing anything. So you'd have throw that takes nothing, throw that takes object, throw that takes type.
I mean, you could. I mean, the general question though is like, when would you ever have that?
You don't want to expose the internal types that you're using.
Well, but then you would basically still expose whatever the entry point was for the user, right? Otherwise, it's not very helpful.
I mean, maybe, but there's all kinds of enterprises that don't want to leak their stuff.
Right, and they can keep using the existing constructors.
Well, either that or... Yeah, I don't know. Like, I have a hard time coming up with an example where I don't want to throw something that has a helpful message. But I mean, if you wanted to, I would just have an overload that takes nothing rather than making those parameters nullable. Because it seems weird to say throw null. It seems more intuitive to say just throw, right, at that point. Seems more logical.
Okay. I mean, I guess really it's why would we make the static throw instead of just flip the default constructor from private to public?
To follow the same pattern in all cases.
Well, but we're introducing a new pattern. The current pattern is you say throw new object disposed exception, and then usually what people pass is type of the type name that they're in dot full name, but it's a string, so people pass whatever they want.
Yeah, what do we have? We have just object name. Oh, I see now. Okay, yeah.
Also,
I mean, the one thing we could do is we could just provide the string-based thing that is nullable, right? That's the closest thing to the existing API surface. And then you can just convert your code entirely to the throw pattern, and it will always bind to something sensible.
Yeah. In particular, ASP.NET in their components web view, in fact, a lot of ASP.NET does throw new object disposed exception object name null. They do it in array builder, circuits host. They've got array builder duplicated a lot. That's why it looked like more than what I've called out so far. But yeah,
I'm curious whether that's, has a good reason besides I couldn't be bothered with producing a string here.
Because yes, most of them are get type name or get type full name. And the original proposal was just add more constructors to just simplify the pattern, and so that we could stop having the full name versus name split, and everybody would pass in a type or this, and then we would start getting consistent representation.
Yeah, and then we'd avoid the issues in like IoT where they pass in a message as the object name, thinking that message is the first parameter.
Right.
That's also a good point, yeah.
But so I think we already have, all of these, and now the ones that we're concerned about are when people want I just want to say, type of the type that I'm in, or if I want the full derived, like, what's the runtime type of the object instead of the declared type of the method, then pass this.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the only two cases. Again, we can talk about taking this constructor that should only be called by the EE and making it public, because I don't know why it should only be called by the EE. Obviously, we support null, so we can make that easier. But I assume that we did this because we had, the us in the past had the opinion that you shouldn't pass null, but we made it work, so.
I mean, this is kind of how I read this comment, right? It should only be called by the EE. Seems more like, well, if we don't have a message, then because we don't have a message for this case, right? But then the other one should have a message. But then somebody was defensively programming and made null just work, right? And that's, I think, how we got here. I think the intent was you always provide a message. That would be my guess, at least. Not message, sorry, object name.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be a message. It's just less helpful. Yeah,
It's the
I
comment
mean,
above it. Yeah. Because all we're
I would
doing
just
is
start with-
helpers for object name, really.
yeah, I mean, I'll be okay with just having these two throw for now and then see what people say.
It's over here.
We can always add the third one.
One down,
But-
tabs, right?
I don't know if it
Seems-
is intentional, but the second throw is missing the stack trace hidden attribute.
Well, so I copied this from a comment in the implementation because in the implementation they have this one deferring to this one, so they were getting uneven
I see.
stack heights. So Yawn or somebody said put stack trace hidden on the object one.
Interesting.
That's
We
it.
do that for a lot of our throw helpers because the throw helper itself is a helper and therefore it's not important to the stack trace. It's just an abstraction to help with inlining and stuff.
Right, but they didn't suggest putting it on both. They just suggested balancing out the stack because one public called the other.
I think we
Interesting.
would probably want it on both.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a single case where I want to see the throw helper on the top of the stack.
Yeah, because logically the user should be able to do this and then it be no difference to the debuggability of the program.
Yeah.
To
That
as if they had just done throw directly.
Yeah, we probably never able to fix the flow analysis problem though, because it's not a C# problem really. I think it's an IL correctness issue.
All right. Add reciprocal sign cost to IFloatingPoint 58607. Sounds like Tanner.
Yep, this is basically for generic math and finalizing the interfaces for .NET 7. There were a few math methods that we added to math and mathf in .NET 6, and so they should probably be on IFloatingPoint as well. Specifically, that's SinCos and reciprocal estimate and reciprocal square root estimate.
What are the guidelines for returning tuples on the framework?
We're okay with it so long it's kind of invariant. Like
Yeah.
meaning we will never add anything to it, but given the API is designed to return you sine and cosine and can nothing ever do differently in the future, it seems fine.
Yeah, they should be
Yeah, and-
named.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they should be
That
named.
was what I was gonna say.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah.
I mean, I would expect the first one to be sine and the second to be cosine, but
Yep, and that's exactly how it is in math and mathf.
Sine and cos, I assume is what we called them.
Yep.
Just making sure we didn't write them out with the e's.
You've got one too many triple ticks in there.
It's 3.
No. Oh, is that 3 dots, not 3 triple ticks
Yeah.
under the first brace?
Yeah, so where I copied the diff, I'll just delete those.
Okay.
we're making a breaking change to an interface.
No, it's not breaking because it's a preview interface.
Right.
It's meant to be breaking.
Indeed.
Now for .NET 8, these would have to be dims if we were adding them.
One day.
One day I'll have the time to finish writing down what all the ways they'll break us are. Alright, obsolete thumbtacked AssemblyName properties 59061. I think I saw that Jan's with us. Hi, Jan.
Hello. Yeah, so we run into this through some kind of related issue where we are looking at assembly name and what it does, and it occurs to us that these properties are basically legacy. They kind of don't make sense on assembly name, and they are not respected in .NET Core. For example, some of them were never respected. For example, the version compatibility property, it was added as future-proofing in .NET Framework and it never did anything. So.
Okay. Why are we obsoleting the get and the set instead of the property?
I don't know. If the attribute can be on the property itself and it just works, then it's certainly fine. So.
I think it can.
Yeah, I mean, that's normally what we do. I mean, if you only want to obsolete one of them, I think it would make sense to put them on the accessor, but if we want to obsolete both directions, then I think putting them on the property itself makes more sense.
Should we the new obsolete attribute, the one that contains the diagnostic ID?
Well, it's the same attribute, right? It's just we also set the diagnostic ID, which we probably should.
All three of them
Just
with
so
the
we
same
have
diagnostic?
Yeah, because I mean, all of the same reason, right?
What's the name of that property?
Diagnostic ID.
Well named.
Oh, I did not come up with that name.
Just reformatting things. You can watch me struggle.
So one thing that is weird is that the project board that tracks runtime changes now has IoT in the name. I don't understand that.
Alright, so I think that's what we want.
Yeah, looks good to me.
Alright. Thank you, Jan.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Alright. Additional argument null exception throw if null overloads. 58047.
Alright, so we approved throw if null. That takes T for classes. that completely excludes pointers. Pointers are somewhat esoteric, so it's not necessarily required or to also just support void pointer here for people who are doing interop and stuff and therefore have to deal with pointers regularly. There was also the proposal for supporting nullable of T for structs. I commented below, and others did as well, that nullable of T for structs in particular doesn't seem like it's a good fit. If it's nullable, then you shouldn't be throwing if it's null.
100% agree.
Yeah, I mean, there's one minor error in that, which is basically if some other parameter says, if you've picked this mode, then you must now provide this option. But
Yeah.
that's not just going to be the standard throw with the name of the parameter. You need a much more complicated message in that case.
Right.
So again, there are cases where you would throw when a nullable is null, but it's not the simple case that this is representing. I have no particular qualms for the void star version.
Typically, do you throw argument null exception when you're past a void pointer?
I do, because I don't think there's a better option. It's an argument, it's null, null isn't allowed, so therefore throw null.
Okay.
There are like interesting trade-offs with it. Like there are actually a number of bugs that are caused by throwing for pointer arguments being null when the pointer arguments point to buffer. Historically, that we a number of methods that take buffers throw for pointer to buffer being null, but that's not the right choice when the buffer size is 0, and it causes like a lot of interesting corner case bugs.
And I think likewise there's a lot of cases where you want to pass in null for the buffer the first time, that way you can get the length. There's lots of Windows APIs that do that, but I think it's probably up to the user to understand when it's correct to check and throw for null versus not, if they're making safe wrappers over it.
All right. So good.
Looks good to me.
Wow, we're just sailing through these. I picked this one for selfish reasons. Okay, this one's funny because we reviewed it, we approved it, and then we decided that there was a layering problem with the proposal we had because system formats ASN1 was not part of the shared runtime, but X509 was, so we couldn't use it in an X509 API. So we turned places that we needed an ASN tag into an integer. Then for complicated reasons, we had to put system formats ASN1 publicly in the shared ref, because otherwise it would break the building of netstandard.dll as forwarders. And so now it is there. So then Kevin suggested that we go ahead and put it back. And then now we've decided we didn't need the full tag. We just needed the tag number, which is what this int was. So basically we're changing an int to a nullable enum. I don't think anyone cares. Does anyone care?
That API hasn't shipped before, obviously.
Correct.
Yeah, then I don't care.
So why was that an int before?
So way back here originally, we had ASN1 nullable ASN1 tag, but then we ended up with a reference assembly inversion problem, and we actually couldn't expose this from the ref without breaking the build. Then things changed during .NET 5 or 6, and now we can, and so where we moved it to an int to fix the inversion, which was...
So basically type forwarded the thingy down, is that what we did?
Yeah, so here we had made it an int, which was just using the same value as the enum, and we were just going to pass it through with a cast. And now we're saying it is an enum, so we're putting the enum back. But since the enum has a semantic 0 value, we're going back to having it be nullable like we did in the original proposal.
Yep, that makes sense.
0 is not a valid value, but because it's semantic, we wanted to make a distinction between you wanted the default and you asked for an invalid thing. Alright. Approved for the 3rd time.
So just this whole class hasn't ever shipped, right?
Correct.
We just approved it. Okay.
Alright. Add the archive comment property for the ZipArchive class. 1547. Wow, that's old.
Do we have anybody that can speak to it?
Looks like
Oh.
add 2 properties.
So I assume they are in the standardized format. Expose it before.
So apparently we're already reading them. We just didn't expose them.
I see.
So we read them out of the file format. We just didn't expose them. So this one makes sense. So the one on, to me, the one on ZipArchive entry makes total sense as get set because
The entire thing is get sent.
right, because you could be, building a new entry or you've opened the thing in update mode. What I don't understand, looking at what they've shown here for ZipArchive, is how this setter works. Because
I mean, what does
I
this
think
comment
that's why they
represent?
asked the question on that the first question. Should we add a constructor?
I mean, ZipArchive is mutable, right? Because once you're building one, you basically get to add entries, right? That's what the create entry thing does. So in that sense, having a setter there isn't terrible.
Yeah, I guess there must just be another member that they're not showing, which is to save it.
Well, I mean, it's dispose, right?
I guess that's
It writes to the stream.
But
yeah,
wait,
you basically, yeah, it's basically a flush or dispose, right? Depending on your viewpoint.
I guess it holds it all in memory until you dispose, and then it flushes it down to the stream that was passed in the constructor.
I guess it Well, yeah, I don't know actually. I don't know how zip works. I think the way zip works, I believe, is that the the table with the entries is at the end. So I think if you write one file at a time, I think it can get those out, and then at the very end it writes the entries.
That's true. But in update, I wonder if in update mode you're allowed to remove things. Doesn't look like it because there's no. Yeah, so I think it pushes all the stuff back out, or pushes all the entries out, and then positions the read-write head between the last entry and the zip table. Okay. Yeah. So the setter will throw, presumably, they throw invalid operation exception and create entry when they're in read mode. The setter should also throw in read mode.
Should also throw if it's too long. I think there's a max.
Sure. This is just the because they're mode based, they'll have extra throws, and I don't think it's enough that we would make it that we would say it shouldn't be a property.
Enough throwing, you mean?
Yeah. That because if you open it in read mode and then assign comment, it'll throw that the comment can't be assigned in read mode. But if you open it in update or write, it should work. And if it has, a maximum length, then sure, that's just argument validation. All right, and then they have here, should it be, string or string? I love that it uses the same number of questions.
Depends on what's ticked, right?
Yeah. I mean, my feeling on that is it depends on what the file format says. If it's a record, or if it's a piece of the data structure that's always there and it might be empty, then the empty string seems like the honest representation. And if it's an optional record, then representing that it wasn't present versus it's the empty string seems semantic. So I would say that depends on the spec. Which would be, can certainly write in a comment here.
What about when you're first creating one? For ZipArchive, at least. Well, for both of them.
Again, for both of them, if it's a mandatory field, right? Like if it's just you have to write down there's a 0-length string here, then starting it off as string.empty seems the most honest answer. Unless the thing that we actually start things off with is created with .NET, in which case we should, admit that that's the answer. But if it's optional and we're not doing it, then string ? Makes sense. So I think the answer is we're the wrong people to answer that because it's to me it's whatever the data spec says.
Well, in the additional details, it says for the archive, it's defined at the end of the central record a 2-byte comment length, and then the actual comment itself.
Yeah. So it sounds like they're not optional.
Right, because you always have to put the length in there.
Yeah.
So you're thinking it should just be system.string. No question mark.
That is my feeling.
I could live with that.
Yeah, it's just in the middle here.
So basically you're saying there's no difference between null and empty?
Right.
So I could never set it to null then? If we don't put the question mark?
Well, I mean, we can have either direction, right? We could annotate it such that it's, never returns null, but can be set to null if we wanted to.
Yeah, I mean the setter is perfectly. It's perfectly fine for it to normalize null into empty. But I think that the reader should materialize the zero length comment as string.empty instead of as null.
Yeah. Which is also why it's probably easier to just mark it as non-null.
But then have the setter allow null.
Yeah, I can never remember. Like it's either this way or the other way around.
Alright, yeah, what is that attribute? Allow null?
I believe so, yeah.
And it goes on the property. Stupid diff spacing. I'm still wrong?
No.
There we go. Alright. That look right?
I think technically that goes on the setter, but I think it's easy enough understood.
Not according to this. It goes on properties. Or
Oh.
parameters or fields. Not on methods.
Okay. And I was wrong.
Yeah, I only learned that, I assumed it was going to go on the set as well, but apparently we designed it in a sensible way. Oh, how odd. Alright. Unless any of you have quickly marked things as ready for review, I think that means that even though I was scolding Emo for delaying my lunchtime unnecessarily, we're actually going to still end early.
That's what I predicted. That's why I cut it down to 1 hour. All right, then I think this is it.
I think I've been neglecting YouTube chat, so seeing if there's anything we missed. So someone asked for the dispose. What should we do if the value will be null? Well, since the thing that you're passing in is describing what object was already disposed, it shouldn't be null, because if it was null, that would have been a different exception. And that's really the only question. So, alright. Ooh, I have a thing for this. So, we have nothing left on the agenda, and I have a gavel. So I declare this meeting adjourned. See you next time. Yes, and I have a gavel.